Tonight, European Union's agreement on asylum seekers. Dubbed as historic. But will it address the migration and asylum crisis? And a fight against misinformation and Islamophobia by a world-renowned Muslim charity as it challenges its detractors. Later in the show, a discussion on the raging wildfires in Canada and what that means for climate change and our future.
But a certain amount of warming is expected in any case. And so yes, we do expect the risks of wildfire to continue to increase.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This is Muslim News Canada on Muslim Network TV. I am Samia Sayed. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will pay a state visit to China next week. The news comes after Beijing said in April it is ready to help facilitate Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. China's foreign ministry spokesperson confirmed today that Abbas will visit China on a 4-day visit starting June 13th. A Chinese official calls the upcoming visit a reflection of good China-Palestine relations. He says China firmly supports the just cause of the Palestinian people. Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia last December, where he also met Abbas. During the meeting, Xi pledged an early and just solution to the Palestinian issue. EU nations have reached a historic agreement on how to share the hosting of asylum seekers and migrants more equitably. It comes after years of failed negotiations over asylum policy. Greece and Italy have been the most affected by the rising numbers of asylum seekers. This proposal calls for compulsory help from other EU countries. There are two options for countries to choose from: either to share the settlement of asylum seekers or to pay a sum of 20,000 euros, which is nearly 29,000 Canadian dollars, per person into a fund managed by Brussels. Poland and Hungary voted against the proposals. Bulgaria, Malta, Lithuania, and Slovakia abstained. One of Canada's largest Muslim charities has won a settlement over a group of publications that accused it of being at the forefront of funding international terror groups. Islamic Relief Canada has agreed on an out-of-court settlement earlier this month for a lawsuit filed against Thomas Quiggin. Quiggin is a former military officer. He describes himself as a researcher. He gained prominence as one of the leading figures in the truck convoy protests. Other names in the lawsuit include the convoy spokesperson, a writer and CEO of an online television channel, another writer and her husband, and a YouTuber who had previously interviewed Quiggin. The exact terms of the settlement remain private. However, as part of the settlement, the defendants acknowledged their previous statements about the charity group were unfounded. France is being rocked by allegations that funds earmarked to oppose extremism in the country have instead targeted groups fighting anti-Muslim prejudice and a Muslim news agency. After a Paris history teacher was murdered, the French government announced the Marianne Fund in April 2021. Its aim was to stem rising separatism. The fund's creation was spearheaded by Marlene Schiappa, currently minister delegate in charge of citizenship. The French media has been accusing the fund's manager of targeting Muslims and Muslim organizations. Prosecutors are investigating the allegations. In interviews, Schiappa has denied any wrongdoing. Please stay tuned and we'll be back after a short break. Experts are using one word to describe the wildfires in Canada: unprecedented. In the past few days, the whole of Canada and parts of the US are feeling the effects of the wildfires, with either the palpable smog in the air or record-breaking levels on the air quality index. But where did these fires come from? What's being done about them? And what does that mean for our future? To discuss these questions, I'd like to welcome Dr. Nathan Gillett, research scientist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gillett, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Dr. Gillett, we've been hearing about these wildfires, especially within the last week, but how did it all start?
This year has seen more than 10 times the average area burnt by wildfire at this stage in the fire season. We've got fires burning across the country, but in particular, a number of large fires started in Alberta in early May associated with a heat wave there. So yes, it really is an unusual wildfire season that we're seeing now.
Mm-hmm. And you said it started in Manitoba, but how much has it spread now?
There's large wildfires burning at the moment in Alberta, in the Northwest Territories, in BC, and then also a number of large wildfires in Quebec. So yeah, across Canada, but particularly in those locations.
Mm-hmm. And what's the status of these fires now? Are they all under control?
So I'm an expert on climate science and the impacts of climate change on wildfire. But I did look at the data from NRCan recently. No, a lot of them are not under control.
Mm-hmm. You know, Canada, as you mentioned, does see its almost fair share of wildfires each summer, but this one is certainly making the headlines. Why is that? What's different this year?
Well, the wildfire season has started early, and we've seen more than 10 times the usual amount of area burnt by wildfires at this time in the year. This has been associated with a very hot May in Canada. So we saw very high temperatures over the west of Canada, heat waves, especially in Alberta and BC. And this has really kind of prompted an early start to the wildfire season, and just a lot more fires and a lot more area burnt than is usual for this time of year.
Mm-hmm. Now, the big question around these wildfires, you know, is what comes next. We've said that this year is unlike anything we've seen before, really, but we're also hearing that it may be signaling a trend of what's to come and even get progressively worse each year. Is that true? Can that actually happen?
Well, we have seen a long-term increase in the amount of area burnt by wildfires in Canada over the past 5 decades or so. At the same time, Canada is warming. It's warming at about twice the global rate. And a number of studies point to a clear connection between climate warming and wildfire. As the climate warms, the forests dry out more quickly. More fires are ignited. When those fires are ignited, they burn more area. So climate change and warming in particular drives more wildfire and more area burnt by wildfire. And so, yes, going forward, we expect the climate to continue warming. You know, how much it warms will depend on how successful we are in reducing emissions, but a certain amount of warming is expected in any case. And so, yes, we do expect the risks of wildfire to continue to increase. Mm-hmm. That said, there is still year-to-year variability, so it's not like, next year is going to be worse than this year, and then the year after worse than that. But on average, we expect increasing intensity of wildfire seasons and more area burnt by wildfires going forward.
Mm-hmm. Between last year and this year, though, it seems like we're feeling this one a lot more. It's burning across Canada and on a greater scale than it was last year. But what happened specifically between last year and this year that we're noticing it to this extent?
Well, like I said, it has been an unusually warm May over much of Canada and especially over the west. At the same time, it's been drier than normal over large parts of Canada. And these two factors both contribute to make wildfires worse.
So what comes next then? You said that it will be growing, not too much, but it will be growing in the next few years. Will Canada be able to keep up with, for example, its emission pledges, given these fire emissions that are coming out?
Good question. So, wildfire emissions are typically treated differently to emissions from burning fossil fuels and other sources. wildfires, well, they're important in terms of emissions of particulates and smoke, which is damaging for air quality and for health. In terms of their greenhouse gas emissions, it's a more complicated equation. If you look over a long enough period, the forest will burn, but then you will get regrowth happening, which takes up the carbon again. So yeah, whether it doesn't necessarily affect kind of Canada's emission pledges and whether it can meet those. Like I already said, increasing wildfire is certainly linked to climate change and is a consequence of climate change.
Mm-hmm. We're hearing wildfires being one of the consequences. We're going to have warmer temperatures. Is there anything else that will be coming in the next few years, especially with these increasing temperatures and climate change?
The clearest signal of climate change is warming temperatures, but climate change does affect a number of other variables as well. It tends to, it dries out the soils, as I already mentioned. In the summers, warmer temperatures will dry out soils and will dry out forests more quickly. That causes more wildfire. But at the same time, a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor, so we can get more intense precipitation. And that is also something that we're projecting going forward, that the most intense rains will become heavier. There's a number of impacts on climate across Canada. With warming, we see shorter snow seasons, less snow in southern Canada, melting of glaciers that can affect or is affecting rivers, and with less water in the rivers. Warmer temperatures drive sea level increases, and so we're seeing sea level increases in over most of Canada's coastlines. So yeah, there's a lot of very significant impacts that are already being felt and will intensify going into the future.
Mm-hmm. Now, another question that Canadians are left with is what to do in the meantime. Air quality levels are being monitored, but there's a palpable haze in the air, and people are wondering if there's any different that they should be doing. Do you have any recommendations?
So I'm not a public health expert. So I can't really comment directly on that. I mean, certainly, there are things that the public health agencies will warn people to not exercise outside, for example, if the air quality is really bad. And so people should pay attention to those kinds of warnings.
Mm-hmm. But this also brings the conversation back to individual, maybe not so much individual actions, but something on our part that we could be doing on why the temperature is raising so much. Do you have anything to contribute towards that kind of conversation?
So to limit climate change, we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We need to get them to net zero if we want to stabilize climate. That's something where action is needed and is happening on a government level, but also down to the level of individuals. So we've seen countries now commit to reducing their emissions to net zero by the middle of the century. A number of countries, and I think that's good progress there. But obviously they need to deliver on those commitments. As an individual, absolutely there are things you can do to reduce your emissions. Using electricity instead of fossil fuels to heat your house would be one thing, or using public transit or walking or cycling, or an electric car instead of burning gas would be another thing. So there are a number of things that we can do personally. But it does also take action, on the part of governments as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time today on the show, Doctor. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. A pleasure to be on. Thanks.
Thank you for watching. Sound Vision is a not-for-profit organization that produces this program, and we need your support for donations. Please scan the QR code on our broadcast or visit our website www.muslimnetwork.tv to donate now so that we can continue to amplify the voices of Muslims in Canada and abroad.